Dust, old paper, and that special mustiness that comes from decades of stored memories that no one has the guts to dig through were all present in the attic, as they always were. After 3 years of widowhood, I was 75 years old and at last fulfilling my son's months-long request to clean out the house before moving into a smaller one. It was a Tuesday in September, as I recall. It was the type of day when the late summer heat had finally subsided and it was safe to open the windows without getting too wet. Even though the attic stairs made my knees unhappy, I was shocked at how determined I was to get there. Perhaps the time had come. Perhaps it was time for me to let go of some things. Thomas and I had left the boxes placed in the same spot over the years. The red bins contain Christmas decorations. The boys' artwork and school projects are in the name-marked plastic containers. We couldn't stand to toss away wedding presents that we had never utilized. Everything that has gathered during 43 years of marriage and a lifetime of family responsibilities, I began with the simple things. 20 years ago, the old curtains were replaced, shattered picture frames. I had saved magazines from the 1980s, but I couldn't recall why. In fact, it felt good. Moving each thing to the donate or trash pile was like releasing a tiny burden I was unaware I was carrying. After that, I located the box. We had ceased using the old artificial Christmas tree once the boys moved out, and it was nestled behind it. A simple shoebox-sized cardboard box without any markings or label. The top of the tape had a thin layer of dust that indicated it had not been moved for years, and the tape itself had yellowed with age. Perhaps decades, I have no idea why I was interested in that specific box. Up there, we had dozens of cartons that were unmarked. However, there was something about its arrangement that made me stop, hidden, purposeful. Hearing my knees creak in protest, I dragged it nearer me and sat down on an old trunk to regain my breath. First the tape resisted, then with a gentle tearing sound that sounded too loud in the silent attic, it gave way. I opened the lid. Letters. Letters filled the box. As I touched them, the rubber bands that had been used to bundle them crumbled to dust since they had long since lost their elasticity. Some of the envelopes were brittle and yellowed, while others were more recent. When I took out the first package and saw the handwriting, my heart started to race. Not Thomas's either, but after 40 years of grocery lists and birthday cards, I knew his handwriting just as well as mine. This was not like the others. Delicate, feminine, and characterized by curves and loops that implied a deliberate use of language. My hands shaking for reasons I couldn't yet identify, I opened the first letter. It said, "Dear Thomas, first. I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted to update you on Rachel's progress." Rachel. In utter confusion, I gazed at the name. Rachel was an unknown name to us. I didn't believe we did, anyhow. I continued reading, each statement making me more perplexed. The letter discussed Rachel, a young child, and her academic accomplishments, her passion for reading, her kind disposition. The author expressed gratitude to Thomas for his understanding of the situation and continued support. In what circumstance? Who was this kid? As I reached for another letter, this one from a different year based on the postmark, my hands were shaking even more. Then another, and yet another. As the afternoon light dimmed and the shadows lengthened, I spent the next 2 hours sitting in that dusty attic, piecing together a story I had never heard of before. It was a narrative about my husband, my Thomas, with whom I had been married for 43 years, and a daughter he had never mentioned. His child from an affair was not Rachel. Thank God the letters made that obvious. She was from a relationship when Thomas was just 19 years old, before he even met me. He had gotten a girl pregnant, but they were both too young and afraid to keep the child. That should have been the end of it, since the child had been adopted by a private organization. However, it wasn't. A different story emerged from the letters. They demonstrated how Thomas had been looking for her for years, how he had used the adoption registry to ultimately get in touch with Rachel when she was 12 years old. He described how he had stayed in touch with her adoptive mother, offering assistance when he could, getting information on Rachel's life, and following her development through letters and pictures, all without ever informing me. The photos were in an envelope at the bottom of the package, which I discovered. Mostly school photos. A young girl with the crooked smile and eyes of Thomas growing from a 6-year-old with gap teeth to a confident adolescent to a young lady wearing a college graduation gown year after year. 18 years have passed since the last picture was taken. At that time, Rachel would have been about 25 years old. Thomas's meticulous calligraphy on the back said, "Rachel, her husband David, and baby Emma." She was holding a baby, and a male was standing next to her. I waited in that attic until there was no more light, until I had to turn on the naked bulb hanging from the ceiling in order to read the letters. I couldn't even begin to sort through the tangled mess that was my feelings. Yes, betrayal. How was Thomas able to hide something so big from me? Confusion, too. What had made him feel the need to conceal this? Beneath everything else, there was an increasing interest in this woman, Rachel, who seemed to have Thomas's grin and blood. I collected all of the messages and pictures and returned them to the box. As I stood up, my knees protested, reminding me that I was 75 years old and had spent too much time sitting still. With the package under my arm, I cautiously descended the attic steps and headed to my bedroom. I read all the letters again that night. This time, slowly, taking note of the dates and specifics I had overlooked in my initial shock. I found out that Rachel's college degree was partially funded by Thomas's assistance. I found out that although she had experienced kindness and love from her adoptive parents, she had not realized the void in her life until she met her birth father, Thomas, couldn't tell me why he had to go someplace else on that day. So I found out that he had missed her wedding because it fell on our anniversary. That anniversary came back to me. Thomas had appeared preoccupied during our dinner at our favorite restaurant. I had assumed he was preoccupied with his job. I knew better now. 5 years before Thomas's death, the final letter in the box was dated. Rachel was writing to express her gratitude to Thomas for helping her through the difficult time following the death of her adopted mother. She said she hoped he would meet Emma, who was now in primary school, and shared his love of drawing. After that, there were no further letters I was unaware of, whether they had ceased writing or whether Thomas had stored more recent letters in another location. My husband kept this secret until the day of his death, and I was left to decide what to do with it. That was the only thing I knew for sure. That night, I didn't get any sleep. As I laid in bed and watched the shadows move across the ceiling, I reflected about the years we had spent together, trust and secrets. How many times had I asked Thomas what was on his mind when his eyes took on that aloof expression? How many times had he claimed nothing or just work, when in reality he was considering a daughter I was unaware of? I felt a sense of betrayal. We had vowed to be honest with one another. Our marriage had been based on open communication and trust. I had assumed so. Had he not told me anything else? What more mysteries could dusty boxes hold? The part of me that had loved Thomas for more than 40 years, however, made an effort to comprehend. When Rachel was born, he was 19 years old, almost like a kid himself. He had decided to place the baby for adoption with his then-girlfriend, and 2 years later he had met me. We had been married for years by the time he reconnected with Rachel. 2 young sons were born to us. Perhaps he was worried about my reaction. Perhaps he believed that I would be more hurt by the truth than by the silence. Perhaps he was correct. That Wednesday morning, as the sun rose, I made up my mind. I had to locate Rachel, not to confront her about her relationship with my husband, or to punish her for being alive. However, she played a role in Thomas's life, and knowing her could help me comprehend the man I had loved. I also wanted to know whether she was aware of me. Had Thomas remained unmarried for all those years, in Rachel's opinion? Or had he told her about the family he'd created after placing her for adoption, including his wife and 2 sons? Was I as secret to her as she had been to me? Or did she even know I existed? Return addresses were included in the mailings, although they were outdated. The last one came from a Portland, Oregon address, but that was 18 years ago. Right now, Rachel might be anywhere. It was a starting point, though I had never been very proficient with computers. Anything that needed more than simple email had always been handled by Thomas. However, my son James had shown me how to use Google for basic searches, so I thought I might give it a shot. With my hands still shaking a little, I went downstairs and made coffee. I found myself looking at the letterbox on my kitchen table every few seconds, as though it could vanish. I opened my laptop and started searching after my second cup of coffee. Without a last name, Rachel was an overly popular name. However, the letters gave me the last name of her adopted parents. Morrison, born in 1973, Rachel Morrison was adopted by Helen and Robert Morrison. It was something, but not much. I finally located her 3 hours later, having followed dozens of dead ends and discovered more about internet research than I ever would have imagined at my age. According to the marriage announcement I saw in an old newspaper, Rachel Morrison wed David Chen in 1998. Although she worked as a children's librarian and had maintained her maiden name professionally, certain documents listed her as Rachel Chen. Emma, born in 1997, and Marcus, born in 2000, were the couple's 2 children. She also called Seattle, Washington, home. Eugene, Oregon, is only 4 hours distant from my house. My heart was racing as I gazed at the address I had discovered using a people search website. She was authentic. She was more than faded photos and a stack of letters. She lived close enough that I could drive there if I wanted to, and she was a real person with a job and a family. Did I want to? Was the question. There was nothing I did for 3 days. Breakfast, newspaper reading, backyard gardening, lunch with my friend Margaret, and dinner by myself in front of the TV were all part of my typical day. But I was tormented by the letterbox. Not ready to look at it, but unable to return it to the attic where I had discovered it, I had transferred it from the kitchen table to my bedroom. As he did each week, my son James checked in with a call on Friday. He was constantly finding time for his mother, despite working as a software engineer and living in California with his wife and teenage daughter. He inquired, "How's the attic project coming?" "Find anything interesting up there?" I nearly told him. "Your father had a daughter before he met me, and I just found out about her." I wanted to say it, but I was unable to. Not quite yet. Not until I realized the significance of it all. I said, "Just the usual," instead. Old junk we should have thrown out years ago. We spent a few more minutes discussing his wife's advancement at work and his daughter's soccer matches. Typical things. Keep everything safe. We hung up and I felt bad about lying to him. What would I say, though? I didn't yet know the whole thing. I brought the box to bed with me once more that night. I went back and read the early correspondence when Thomas was just getting to know Rachel. Every line reflected his excitement. From the way Helen Morrison's letters mentioned things he'd told them, I knew he'd written back to her. He had told me anecdotes about his early years, as well as his aspirations and desires. These were likely things he had previously told me, but in a different setting, Helen wrote one letter that really stood out to me. It was dated 1991, roughly 4 years after Thomas and Rachel had gotten back in touch. It said, "Dear Thomas, Rachel never stops asking about you. She wants to know everything, including what you do for a living, what you enjoy reading, and what your favorite foods are. I respond to her inquiries as best I can based on your correspondence, but I believe she's really asking a different question. Do you think about her? Do you care about her? Do you wish things had been different? I see it in your letters, so I tell her yes to all of these things. Even if things have complicated your involvement in her life, you care a great deal, but occasionally I worry about this concealed nature. Regarding Rachel's adoption, Robert and I have always urged candor. She is aware that she was given the opportunity to have a better life because she was loved sufficiently. However, she is also aware that her biological parents made that decision someplace. I don't want to overstep, Thomas, but I hope someday you'll be able to be fully present in her life, not as a replacement for Robert. He's her father in every way that matters, but as someone who cares about her and wants to know her. She deserves that, and from your letters, I think you deserve it too." I set the letter aside and dabbed at my tears. It sounded as though Helen Morrison was a wise and kind person. By acknowledging that love is endless and that a child can have several individuals who care about her without any of those relationships being weakened, she had allowed Thomas to be a part of her family in some tiny way. It had been impossible for Thomas to be fully present in Rachel's life, though because he lived a different life with our sons and me. A life without a daughter from his former existence. Or did it? Was it possible? I considered how many years we had been wed. If Thomas had been honest with me when he first discovered Rachel, would I have been upset? At 32, I was occupied with raising 2 small boys and establishing our shared existence. Would I have gotten it? Or would I have perceived it as a danger? An additional woman or child who would divert his focus from us? I hoped that I would have been sympathetic. I couldn't be certain, though. Perhaps Thomas was also unable to be certain. Perhaps that was the reason he had remained silent. Exactly 1 week after discovering the box, I did something I never would have imagined doing on Monday morning. I engaged a private detective, Margaret, whose daughter had hired him during a contentious divorce, suggested him. His name was Robert Chen, which was obviously a common one, and had nothing to do with Rachel's husband. He was in his 60s, semi-retired, and I felt instantly at ease with his kind demeanor and caring gaze. I told him everything. Regarding Rachel, the letters, and Thomas. Regarding my need to know whether she knew who I was, and whether she was aware of the family Thomas had established after placing her for adoption. I explained I don't want to disrupt her life, while seated in his little downtown office. I'm not trying to punish her or make her feel guilty, I just need to understand what she knows before I decide whether to contact her. Robert took notes while nodding. Do you know what you'll do if you find out she didn't know about you? If Thomas kept you a secret from her the same way he kept her a secret from you? That was not a possibility I had considered. I had somehow thought that Thomas had at least informed Rachel that he was married and that she was aware of me. What if he hadn't, though? What if she was as surprised by me as I was by her? I said, I don't know, in admission. I guess I'll figure that out when the time comes. Robert vowed to keep quiet without getting in touch with Rachel or her family. He would begin by looking through public documents, social media, and whatever else he might uncover. He would have a draft report for me in a week. It seemed like the longest 7 days of my life. I was unable to concentrate. I completely gave up on the attic project. I was worried that my younger sons, James and Michael, could hear something in my voice and begin asking questions I wasn't prepared to answer, so I stopped taking their calls. At our lunch date on Thursday, Margaret finally cornered me. After I had been looking at my sandwich for 5 minutes without eating, she demanded, "Okay, what's going on? You've been weird all week. Are you sick? Is it the house thing? Because you don't have to move if you're not ready. The boys will understand." I decided after glancing at my 30-year pal I had to tell someone. To make sure it sounded as weird as it felt in my mind, I had to say it aloud. I mutely said, "Thomas had a daughter. Before he met me, he gave her up for adoption, but he found her again when she was 12 and kept in touch with her until he died. I found letters in the attic he never told me." Margaret dropped her sandwich onto her plate. Her mouth was open as she gazed at me, taking in what I had just spoken. Then she grabbed my hand from across the table. She said, "Oh, sweetie. Oh, honey, that's huge. How are you handling this?" I started crying, which surprised me. In the diner, Margaret held my hand, made calming sounds, and waved the worried waitress away as I cried uncontrollably. I cried, "I don't know. I don't know if I'm angry or sad or confused or all of it. I loved him, Margaret. For 43 years I loved him and I thought I knew him. But this—" Margaret firmly said, "This doesn't mean you didn't know him. People are complicated. They keep secrets for all kinds of reasons, and most of those reasons have nothing to do with not loving the people around them. But why didn't he tell me? Why carry this alone for all those years? Maybe because he was scared, maybe because he didn't know how, or maybe because he was trying to protect you from something that might hurt you." She held my hand. "What are you going to do?" I informed her of Robert Chen, the inquiry, and my need to hear Rachel's side of the story before making a decision. Margaret nodded appropriately as she listened without passing judgment. "You know," she replied after I finished, "this could turn out to be a gift. Not how you would have chosen to receive it, obviously, but family is family. And from what you've told me, this Rachel woman didn't do anything wrong. She was just a kid who wanted to know her biological father. I know that, I do, but it doesn't make it hurt any less that Thomas kept her from me." "Of course not, but maybe when you meet her, if you meet her, you'll understand better why he made the choices he did." I was in the garden pushing weeds on the day Robert Chen called with his report. It was the kind of day Thomas would have cherished, a lovely afternoon in early October. Over the years, we had spent many hours together in this garden, planting vegetables and roses, having friendly arguments about whether tomatoes were considered veggies or fruit, and simply enjoying the thrill of getting our hands dirty. Robert said, "Mrs. Bennet," in a soft voice over the phone, "I have your report ready. Would you like to come to the office, or should I come to you?" "Just tell me," I responded, firmly settling into the garden bench. "Did she know about me?" "Yes," he said. "She knew. Rachel was aware that Thomas was married and had 2 sons. According to what I could find, and I was very careful, Mrs. Bennet, I promise, Thomas was honest with her about his family situation from the beginning." Something in my chest relaxed. That was at least there. Thomas hadn't misled her about us, at least. "There's more," said Robert, "and I think you'll want to see this in person. Can you come by this afternoon?" After an hour, I found myself seated in Robert's office once more, examining a file folder containing a wealth of data regarding Rachel Chen, née Morrison, profiles on social media, professional data from the library system in which she was employed, recent photos from her publicly accessible Facebook page. Something caught my breath right there in the middle of the file. It was a 2-year-old blog article from Rachel's own website. It was titled, "Finding My Birth Father, a Love Story." "She wrote about him," Robert muttered, "about their relationship. I think you should read it." I started reading Rachel's words with trembling palms. I was 12 years old when I first met my birth father, Thomas, the story started. When I was old enough to comprehend, my parents, my real parents, the ones who reared me, loved me, taught me how to ride a bike, and supported me at school plays, would never keep my adoption a secret or something to be ashamed of. They explained that my biological parents were very young and bravely chose to give me a life they couldn't provide. For years, that was plenty. Yes, I was wondering, what isn't an adopted child? However, I was adored by my parents. There didn't seem to be anything lacking. My birth father then discovered me through the adoption registry when I reached 12, and my parents sat me down and asked if I wanted to meet him. They weren't afraid or intimidated. They simply wanted to know what I wanted. I said yes. Rachel continued by talking about how anxious Thomas had been, how he'd brought her a book about constellations after somehow learning she loved astronomy, how he'd cried when he first saw her, and how that had caused her to cry as well, and how they had met at a coffee shop in Portland with her parents present. She described the years of correspondence and sporadic phone conversations, always with her parents' consent and understanding, how Thomas had been there but not intrusive, curious but not controlling, and how he had respected that Helen Morrison was her mother and Robert Morrison was her father while still making a tiny place for himself in her life. She then wrote about his relatives. "He once showed me pictures and I could see how much he loved them," she said. "Thomas had a wife named Eleanor and 2 sons, James and Michael. When he spoke of them, his entire face brightened. When I questioned him once if they were aware of me, he claimed it was complicated and had a dejected expression on his face. I didn't press the issue, believing that it was his decision to make and his family to handle, but I couldn't help but wonder what Eleanor would say if she found out about me. Would she be upset or hurt, or would she realize that I wasn't attempting to take anything away from her and that I was only curious about my origins? 3 years ago, my birth father passed away. A quick and unexpected heart attack. 6 months later, I contacted his cell phone, and a stranger answered, informing me that the number had been changed. That's when I found out. After that, I discovered his obituary online. There was no reference to a daughter called Rachel. Thomas Bennett, beloved husband of Eleanor, devoted father to James and Michael. I wrote a letter to Eleanor once, trying to explain, but I never sent it. How do you tell a widow that her husband had a whole other relationship she didn't know about? How do you do that without coming across as someone who is trying to hurt her? I understood. I did, but it still hurt. I couldn't meet his family, attend his funeral, or publicly mourn him. I so kept my grief to myself. I shared information about my birth father with my spouse, parents, and kids. And I want someone to know that Thomas Bennett was a nice man, which is why I'm writing this now and letting it go into the abyss. He spent years attempting to atone for his youthful transgression in any tiny ways he could. I was never forgotten by him. He was always concerned I never felt like a shameful secret, despite being one. I hope someday his family knows about me. I hope they understand that I loved him too, in my own way, and I hope Eleanor knows that he loved her completely. Whatever space he made for me in his life didn't take anything away from what he felt for her. While Robert Chen sat calmly at his desk and allowed me to digest, I read the message 3 times with tears running down my cheeks. Rachel wants to get in touch with me. She had intended to tell me about their connection and about Thomas. However, she had kept quiet out of deference and sympathy for my sorrow. She had kept a secret that could hurt me, just like Thomas had done to keep me safe. When I eventually looked up from the books, Robert inquired gently, "What do you want to do, Mrs. Bennett?" I wiped my eyes and inhaled deeply. I had a clear idea of what I wanted for the first time since discovering that box in the attic. When I said, I want to meet her. I want to meet my husband's daughter. The phone call was more difficult than I anticipated. After days of practicing my response, my mind went utterly blank when I finally dialed the number Robert had given for Rachel's work phone at the library. Seattle Public Library, Greenwood Branch. This is Rachel speaking. How can I help you? As one might anticipate from a children's librarian, she spoke in a kind yet polished manner. I could hear the normal, cheerful pandemonium of a busy library, children laughing and conversations in the background. Hello? Is anyone there? Yes, I said. Sorry, yes. My name is Eleanor Bennett. I think you knew my husband, Thomas Bennett. A protracted hush ensued. Then, Mrs. Bennett? Very softly. Yes. I found your letters in our attic, and I read your blog post about Thomas, about him being your birth father. Rachel's voice was now trembling as she said, Oh, God. Mrs. Bennett, I'm so sorry. I never meant to intrude on your life. I never wanted to cause you pain. I wrote that letter to you after he died, but I couldn't. I didn't think it was fair to— Rachel, I softly interrupted. Can we meet in person? I think we have a lot to talk about. 3 days later, in the middle of our two worlds and lifestyles, we made plans to meet at a coffee shop in Seattle. I informed my boys that I was going to the city to see an old acquaintance. It's not quite the truth, but it's also not a lie. I wasn't yet prepared to tell them this. I had to see Rachel for myself first. I was unable to sit still due to my nervousness, so I arrived 15 minutes early. I had selected a table close to the window so I could keep an eye on the door. The last picture I had seen of Rachel was from her college graduation decades ago, so I had no idea how she looked now, but I knew I would recognize her, and I did. At precisely 2 o'clock, she entered the coffee shop and stopped just inside the entrance to look around. She was now in her early 40s, with glasses balanced on her nose and dark hair pulled up in a handy ponytail. As one might anticipate from a librarian on her afternoon off, she was dressed comfortably and casually in jeans and a cardigan. My breath caught, though, because of her face, the eyes of Thomas. Thomas's tilted grin. I'd seen Thomas make that exact identical move 1,000 times, even down to the little inclination of her head when she was contemplating We Locked Eyes, and I saw her inhale deeply before approaching my table. Softly, Mrs. Bennett? She asked. Eleanor, I clarified, getting to my feet. Please, call me Eleanor. We both sat down awkwardly, obviously unsure of where to start. After speculating about what she may prefer, I got 2 coffees and now pushed one in her direction. Rachel remarked, Thank you for agreeing to meet me. I wasn't sure you'd want to, after everything. I wasn't sure either, I acknowledged. For a while I was very angry, at Thomas for keeping you secret, at you for existing, even though I knew that wasn't fair, at myself for not somehow knowing. With her hands encircling her coffee cup, Rachel nodded. She hesitated, picking her words carefully, and then added, I asked him once, years ago, why he didn't tell you about me. He said that he loved you too much to risk losing you, that he'd made so many mistakes before he met you, and you were his fresh start. He was afraid that telling you about me would make you see him differently as someone who'd failed, who'd given up a child. I stated I wouldn't have, but I wasn't positive that was accurate. Or maybe I would have, at first, but we could have worked through it. We could have found a way. Rachel's eyes were sorrowful. Maybe it would have broken something between you that couldn't be fixed. I used to be angry about it too, about being a secret. But when I got older, when I had my own kids and understood how complicated love can be, I realized he was just trying to protect everyone, you Me, his sons. He was trying to keep all of us safe from hurt, I whispered. But he hurt himself instead, carrying that secret alone for so many years. Yes, Rachel said, he did. That afternoon, we spoke for 3 hours. After meeting David, a software engineer, at college, Rachel told me about her life. Emma, her daughter, is currently a 26-year-old physical therapist. Marcus, her 23-year-old son, is completing his master's degree in education. Both of her adoptive parents are now deceased, but she informed me that they had supported her relationship with Thomas and never felt intimidated by it. She pointed out instances where Thomas had been present in minor ways as she scrolled through photos on her phone of family get-togethers and holidays. He had sent a birthday card, a book that he had suggested. He had given parenting advice over the phone. He was more like a favorite uncle than a father, Rachel clarified. That was the only way it could work, with my real dad still alive. But he was important to me. He mattered. I also showed her the photos. Even though it pained to look at the pictures of Thomas, I kept them on my phone. We were both really young on our wedding day, the boys as infants, children and teenagers, ordinary times and family vacations. 43 years of a rich, full existence that I had assumed I knew all about. You made him happy, Rachel remarked as she looked at a picture of Thomas taken on our 40th anniversary. I can see it in his face. Whatever secrets he kept, whatever choices he made, he loved you completely. I hope you know that. When I said, I'm starting to. It's hard, though, reconciling the man I knew with this person who kept such a huge part of his life hidden from me. He was both people, remarked Rachel softly. The devoted husband and father you knew, and the young man who made a difficult choice and tried to make peace with it. One doesn't cancel out the other. Rachel paused as we gathered our coats and empty coffee cups in preparation for our departure. She said, "Can I ask you something? And please, feel free to say no if it's too much." "Of course. Would you be willing to meet my family? My kids and husband? They know all about Thomas, and they've heard so much about you over the years, even though I never thought I'd get to actually introduce you, Emma, especially. She's always been fascinated by her biological grandfather. She'd love to meet you." James and Michael, my own sons, who were unaware of any of this, came to mind about the difficult talk I'd eventually have to have with them. About how nobody had anticipated how big and complicated our family had suddenly grown. However, I couldn't help but nod as I looked at Rachel, at the smile on her face, and at the gaze of Thomas. "Yes," I said, "I'd like that very much." The next week, we arranged to have dinner at Rachel's house. My head was reeling with what I had discovered as I made my way back to Eugene that night. Thomas wasn't flawless. He had committed errors, concealed information, and attempted to handle unachievable circumstances in subpar ways. He had been nice, though. He had maintained his obligation to me and our sons while honoring his relationship with Rachel. Perhaps that wasn't the betrayal I initially believed it to be, as he had loved other individuals in various ways. It might have been human. I gave James a call that evening. The time had come. "Mom, everything okay? You sound weird." "I need to tell you something," I replied. "Something about your father. It's going to be surprising, maybe upsetting, but I need you to hear me out before you react. You're scaring me. What's going on?" So I told him, regarding Rachel, the letters, and the box. Everything. On the other end of the line, as he processed the information, I heard him grow silent, then I heard him inhale deeply. "Does Michael know?" "Not yet. I wanted to tell you first, since you're the oldest. I'll call him tomorrow." One more pause. Afterwards, "Are you okay, Mom? This has to be hard for you." You can rely on James to consider me first. Even as a child, he had always been that way, putting other people's feelings ahead of his own. Sincerely. "I'm getting there," I said. "I was angry at first. But I've met her, James, Rachel, and she's lovely. She's part of your father, and I think you and Michael should meet her too, if you want to." James slowly said, "She's our half-sister," trying out the phrase. "We have a half-sister. Dad had another daughter." "Yes. Wow, that's huge." He remained silent for a while. "Did she know about us?" "Yes. Your father never hid his family from her. We were the ones who didn't know about her." "Why didn't he tell us? Why keep her secret all these years?" "I think he was scared. Of judgment, of losing the family he'd built, of forcing us to deal with something complicated when he could keep it simple by staying silent." James muttered, "That's not fair." And I could hear the rage beginning to seep into his voice. "It's not fair to her, and it's not fair to you. We're adults, Mom. We could have handled it." "Maybe, but we'll never know now. All we can do is decide how to move forward." James was silent for a while. Following that, "When can I meet her?" 3 weeks later, the supper at Rachel's place was unreal. My 2 sons arrived with their families. Michael and his wife, Sarah, arrived by plane from New York. James and his wife and daughter drove up from California. In Seattle, we all met in Rachel's living room, which was filled with strangers who nevertheless seemed like family. David, Rachel's husband, put everyone at ease right away with his warmth and friendliness. Inquiring about Thomas and obviously attempting to piece together the grandfather they had never really known, Emma and Marcus were friendly and inquisitive. Emma and my granddaughter Jennifer clicked right away since they both enjoy hiking. With supper at Rachel's table, we passed plates and engaged in conversation that grew more comfortable and organic with time. Thomas was the subject of several stories, some of which overlapped and others of which showed fresh aspects of him that different people recalled in different ways. Rachel chuckled and remarked, "He used to help me with my math homework." Over the phone, I'd call him whenever I got stuck, and he'd walk me through the problems step by step. James remarked, "He did the same thing with me." With a startled expression, I thought I was the only one who called him for homework help. I smiled in spite of myself and remarked, "He probably had the same patient explanation ready for everyone. That's how he was, always ready to teach." I found myself observing the conversations around the table as the evening went on, getting to know their half-sister, my sons. My grandchildren are learning that they have cousins they were unaware of. A family that grows in unforeseen ways, completing the gaps we were unaware existed. As the others went to the living room for coffee and dessert, Rachel noticed that I was observing and sat down next to me. Silently, "Thank you for coming," she said, "for giving me this chance. I know it can't have been easy." "It wasn't," I said up forward, "but I'm glad I did. Thomas loved you, Rachel. And seeing you now, meeting your family, understanding how you fit into his life, it doesn't make me love him less. It just makes me understand him better." "He talked about you constantly," Rachel remarked. "In his letters, on the phone. He'd tell me about things you did together, about how you made him laugh, about how lucky he felt to have found you. I used to wonder if he exaggerated, if anyone could really be as wonderful as he made you sound. And now I understand. You're exactly who he said you were, kind, strong, willing to face hard truths and find grace in them." She grinned. "I'm glad he had you, Eleanor. I'm glad you had each other." In the months that followed, Rachel and I forged a bond that was distinct from Thomas's recollection. Every few weeks we got together for coffee and discussed our lives and occasionally him. She told me about her preferred bookshop. I gave her my apple pie recipe, which Thomas had adored. My sons welcomed their new sister and included her family in birthday and holiday celebrations. Sarah, Michael's wife, and Emma, Rachel's daughter, grew especially close, exchanging texts every day and organizing a trip for the girls. I had finally moved out of the big house, and I was sitting in my new apartment one evening, about a year after discovering the letters, when I decided I was ready to let go of the resentment I had been holding inside. Understand, but don't necessarily forgive. With the knowledge and bravery he had at the moment, Thomas had taken the best decisions he could. They were not the best decisions. He wasn't a flawless individual, though. We're not. Once again, I took out the letterbox. I had read them so many times that I was almost able to recall them. However, I paid attention to something else this time. It was what Thomas had kept, not what he had concealed. He had cared, as evidenced by these letters, that Rachel had been important enough to preserve all of her writing, that he had maintained these relationships despite his inability to be totally present in her life. Helen Morrison's final letter, which thanked Thomas for his support, included a postscript that I had previously missed. Rachel wanted me to tell you that she loves you, even though she doesn't fully understand what that word means in your context. She knows you're not her dad. That's Robert. But you're something. You're important. And she wants you to know that whatever space you have in your life for her, it's enough. She's not asking for more than you can give. After gently folding the letter, I returned it to the box. Then I took action that I ought to have taken months before I composed the letter myself. "Dear Thomas," I said first, "how dare you keep this from me for so long? How kind of you to make room in your life for Rachel while still being totally present for me and the boys I found your box. I met your daughter. I feel furious, sad, bewildered, and grateful all at once. I wish you had believed the truth I told you. However, I can see why you didn't. Anyway, I'm beginning to get it. Love is a complex thing. Families are messy. Additionally, carrying our responsibilities alone, rather than asking others to share them with us, is sometimes the most kind thing we can do. By the way, Rachel is amazing. She has your eyes, your awful jokes, and your patient manner of explaining things. She's a good mother, a loyal wife, and a dedicated librarian who gets excited when she talks about books the way you used to. She is evidence that you made the right decision all those years ago to give her to parents who could love her completely and honestly. However, she also serves as evidence that you are still her biological father, that despite the difficulties, you managed to remain in touch, to be important in her life, and to show up. Thomas, I'm proud of you for that. Yes, I'm angry, hurt, of course, but proud, too. Finding out about Rachel doesn't alter my love for you. It only makes it more complex, nuanced, and genuine, because I now love you all. The man who created a life with me and the man who never forgot about a daughter he had given up. I'm grateful for Rachel. Even though you had to pass away for me to get the unexpected gift of growing our family, I am grateful for it. I appreciate you protecting her the only way you know how. I mourn you. I forgive you. And I wish you were here to witness the exquisite complexity of our family. My dearest Eleanor, maybe I'd show it to Rachel someday. Maybe I'd keep it private between Thomas's memory and me. But I sealed the letter in an envelope and placed it in the box with the others. Knowing that I had stated what I needed to say was sufficient for the time being. At 75, I had discovered that family isn't always the one you're born into or the one you make through marriage. Sometimes it's the one that shows up out of the blue, patiently waiting for you to be ready while concealed in a box of letters in a dusty attic. Rachel was a surprise, not a betrayal, and often the finest gifts are the ones we don't even realize we need until they show up. Rachel and I planted a Japanese maple tree in her backyard last week. It's small and delicate, with leaves that turn a magnificent red in the fall. We dedicated it to Thomas, the complex man who brought us together, who loved us both in different ways, and who gave his all under the most trying conditions. Emma emerged with her own shovel to help us as we worked the dirt around the roots. "What ought we should name it?" "The tree," she inquired. "Is a name necessary for it?" I smiled at Rachel as we exchanged glances. "What about hope?" I proposed. "Perfect," Rachel replied. "Hope for all the connections we thought were lost but turned out to be just waiting to be found." I felt a sense of acceptance settle in my chest as we stood there together, 3 generations of women bound together by a single man's secret. Perhaps it wasn't total peace, but it was close. For 43 years, Thomas Bennett kept a secret from me, and when I eventually found out, it almost broke me. But ultimately, it gave me a daughter I never knew I had, and a family that was larger than I had thought possible. I'm still discovering at 75 that life is long, complicated, and full of surprises, that people we love can disappoint us and still be worthy of our affections, and that although secrets can be painful, they can occasionally be less painful than the truth. And that, if we're very fortunate, sometimes the things we believe will destroy us actually help us grow. Although I miss Thomas every day, I am thankful for the unexpected gift he gave me. A link to Rachel and her family, not money or property. A reminder that love expands rather than divides when it spreads to more people. It's small now, delicate, but with time and care, it will grow strong and tall. Rachel texts me images of the Japanese maple every few weeks, showing me how it's growing as it stretches toward the sun and sprouts new leaves similar to our unplanned family. Similar to forgiving. Similar to love that finds its way home, even if it doesn't follow the route we had anticipated.